Hello, my name is Amidi Adeyemi. I'm 18 years old and I was a senior at Central High School, Newark, New Jersey. Every student is going through problems, and if you're going through problems at home or at school and there's nobody for you to disclose the information to, that's an extra stress. And I believe that if there was like any type of like maybe someone for me in school that was able to like ask me how am I doing mentally, is everything okay, I would have felt as if I was seen or something. Like I would have felt as if someone cared for me, not only about my academics, but care for me mentally, care for me like how am I doing? Am I achieving everything I wanted? So I really think it's really important and crucial for us to have like something stable for every kids in regards to mental health in every school system.
Good afternoon. On behalf of New Jersey Citizen Action, our speakers and panelists, welcome to this afternoon's webinar, Implementing Mental Health Screenings in New Jersey Schools with SBIRT. My name is Laura Waddell. I am the Healthcare Program Director at New Jersey Citizen Action, and I'm joined by my colleague Faryal Najib, our healthcare organizer, and we're glad you could join us today. Some of you may have joined our Springtime 2021 webinar, which introduced school-based screenings as a way to address student mental health and substance misuse challenges. Since that discussion, we have been approached by many who would like to know how exactly schools can implement a school-based screening program for their students. Being that this is October and National Depression and Mental Health Screening Month, and students are now back in school for a month in person, it seems like a great time for this instruction and discussion for our schools, districts, counselors, and more. But just before the start of the pandemic, New Jersey Citizen Action partnered with Bordentown Regional High School to implement an SBIRT screening, brief intervention and referral to treatment pilot program for its freshman class. The pilot produced the SBIRT in Schools implementation guide, which was released last month. It provides a thorough instruction on how to implement an SBIRT program in schools, considerations to make, how to assemble a program team, how to choose a screening tool, sample scripts, parental communications, referral resources, possible funding streams, and so much more. Nell Geiger, the licensed professional counselor and student assistance counselor at Bordentown Regional High School, led that pilot program and also co-wrote the implementation guide along with Daniel Mera. In a moment, Nell will lead our walk through on this afternoon of what you can expect to find in the implementation guide. And then we'll move to our Q&A panel, and Nell will be joined by Barbara Kaufman, Director of Prevention Services at Prevention is Key, and Christina Peary, School Counselor at Lincoln Park Middle School. Barb and Christina will talk a bit about the school-based SBIRT programs they've been running, and together Nell, Barb, and Christina will be able to answer all of your questions. So as you think of them, please enter your questions in the Q&A box, and Faryal will collect them for the Q&A portion later. And we'll then end with some announcements and ways to get involved in making SBIRT a statewide reality. But before I introduce Nell, let's take a look at what's at stake here in New Jersey. Next slide, Adam. In 2018, there were 197 youth overdoses. In 2019, 36% of New Jersey high school students reported feeling sad or hopeless, and 15% seriously considered attempting suicide. And prior to the pandemic, over 1 in 3 young people relied on schools as their primary source of mental health care. You know, schools play a critical role in responding to the increased need for mental health and substance use services, and are best positioned to reach those students who need help the most. And recent reports show that access to mental health care staff has declined for students of color. So schools must be able to offer their students a safe place to both voice their concerns and provide access to the counseling or the treatment that they need. But this is, of course, why you are all here today, to learn more about how you can help your students by implementing an SBIRT program in your schools. Next slide, Adam. So SBIRT, as I mentioned, screening, brief intervention, and referral to treatment. It's really about having a confidential conversation with your students. It's an evidence-based tool. The screening portion in the process uses a self-reporting questionnaire to assess for risk. And it can be administered by trained personnel. So SBIRT can be administered by staff personnel. They only need to be trained. They do not need to be licensed to administer SBIRT. And then should a student need a brief intervention, which is a structured conversation, and that would be with a licensed healthcare professional, school nurse, social worker, someone who the district contracts with, a student assistant counselor, paraprofessional, or a peer who are trained in brief intervention techniques. And then the last is referral to treatment. And that can be performed by a school counselor. You know, screenings do not become part of the student's record, and they are preventative and restorative, not punitive. So, and as we, of course, as we support statewide SBIRT legislative efforts, schools don't have to wait. You can start a program in your school this year. So now I'd like to turn it over to Nell Geiger, LPC SAC counselor at Bordentown Regional High School. She's here to teach you exactly how. Nell?
Thank you, Laura, and my esteemed colleagues. I wanted to really been a pleasure working with Laura and New Jersey Citizen Action Group for these past 2 years. Certainly, we didn't know COVID was going to be in the mix of our project. I know a lot of my friends and colleagues are out there, so hello and thank you for your support. I feel the love. This is something that is near and dear to my heart because I believe in this as another tool for a lot of us as counselors, as something very simple and another tool in our toolbox that can help our students. So just so all of you know, the implementation guide that we created was myself, Dan Mira, Farrell, and Laura, and the New Jersey Citizen Action Group will be accessible after this webinar. So you'll learn how, step by step within the guide, how to administer a successful school-based program. So in the fall of 2020, Bordentown Regional High School began our SBIRT pilot program. It was a relationship that was key with New Jersey Citizen Action Group and the leadership of Bordentown Regional High School and middle school that I can't have enough gratitude to allow myself as their SAC counselor to be involved in. We chose the freshman class. And again, this was 2 years ago now, so those current students are juniors this year. Permission slips were given out in the summertime, while they were 8th graders, so that we were ready to start the initiative in the fall. Parents could opt out at any time. And of the 203 freshmen, we received 100 parental consent forms. The screening tool that we used was a hybrid. We wanted to ask questions to our students. There were 9 questions. Again, all of you will receive the sample of that screening tool that we utilized. But in a printed or digital form, one of the questions could be, we chose to use bullying, some questions about substance use, and mental health challenges. And as we go through today's tutorial, you will see how I will explain how and what to do in the event a student is flagged, and how they're flagged with a yes or no response and how to proceed. Next slide. So this graph shows you the 100 students who were screened. And again, the screening is what we introduce to our students. A sample you have in front of you as a counselor or whoever is trained, a script. So you're never without any sort of support. And I was always consistent with our students. And I would like, the simple thing I would say is I would like to ask a few screening questions about mental health and substance use that we're asking your freshman students in your grade. Second, we then addressed confidentiality. And third, I would say, is it okay to ask these questions? And so of the 100, 51 did receive brief intervention, which is just a more in-depth conversation, like Laura alluded to, again, with a lot of tools and supports at our disposal to talk about whether it was use, whether it was they were feeling sad or down, feeling, I got a lot of responses because it was during a very difficult time with COVID, a lot of anxiety, a lot of heightened depression, so that the numbers are high because of that. And 23 were referred for further counseling. And so that's really SBIRT. When it says treatment, we're talking about counseling. And that counseling can either be in the school or outside of the school. Next slide. So keys to success for this to ensue is certainly close collaboration with your team. I couldn't have done this without, again, my principal that I know he may be on here, our superintendent, our Board of Ed, my CDA director. I had an amazing intern that was part of this project. Parents, I have been with my district for well over a decade. And because of that, I've established a lot of sound relationships and trust so that a lot of our community believed that I could spearhead this project. So again, it's so very important for those of you who pursue this, and we can talk again in more length after this evening about how to address the various parents and have a lot of community events, public forums, webinars. A lot of information was sent home, but most importantly, we have to accentuate protecting student privacy and confidentiality. So while many in our community know of the growing devastation that mental health issues and substance use present, we will further be heartened to learn that SBIRT affords this evidence-based model with the capacity to discover and interrupt these issues early on. And that is what we have to all know of the great benefit of a program like SBIRT is about early intervention, communicating and conversating and educating our students about if they're using, why, and some ways that we can curve those decisionings. And those that don't use and are making very healthy decisions, to award them and ask them why and what are they doing instead of. As the program coordinator, that being a SAC counselor, I was responsible for the oversight of the SBIRT program. It could be the nurse, it could be a social worker in a school. The second counselor in our department helped facilitate the initial screens and the brief interventions, which again is a little further conversation. Our school administrator, Mr. Walder, he approved and overviewed a lot of our step-by-step project over time. And our support staff I couldn't have done this. It was hand in hand with one of our TCNJ interns and also another colleague that helped to assist with the administration. So procedures to establish an SBIRT program. Next slide. So you want to, again, all of this is found in our guide. But first you want to just identify which grade you will screen. Chris is here, who's going to tell you about her screening was done in a middle school. Again, identify what time of the year. For us, it was the fall, as soon as students, and what we're going to do in Bordentown is we've just gotten approval to do our freshman class again. And how will you keep track of the data? You might use a computer, a tablet for each screener to directly input data, or you can print out and manually write in appropriate data to compile after SBIRT is completed. Who's going to be your team, which personnel. And I know a lot of you, we are all inundated. We're also very busy with a lot of other directives within the school setting, that how can we possibly do another program? And for me, it was just, again, another tool for me to be able to use to get to know more students than would have ever been referred to my office. So I felt it incredibly short to do and extremely effective and very simple. Process for warm handoffs is simply just when the brief intervention was done, that students were referred directly to me or one of the other counselors or outside. We had the physical location to conduct it was private and confidential in the office of the SAC counselor. Educational materials that we utilize in the whole program is, I would use brain like scans from showing how alcohol or drugs or how our brain is changed over time with use. A lot of prevention education materials that I would review with the student. I also don't know, you can develop scripts for calling parents if need be. Again, having a relationship, and if you're in a school over a long period of time, you probably would feel more comfortable with certainly calling parents to discuss any concerns you might have. And again, I can't accentuate enough the essential element of any successful SBIRT program is confidentiality. That parents, if there is anyone at risk or is wanting to harm themselves or feel suicide, obviously we had to call a parent or parents or guardian to get some outside help and ensue a risk assessment at that time. And besides the copy of the introduction script and the actual craft screening tool, the education materials, the consent forms, and the scripts, a list of all those referral resources were really important for me to always have as part of my file when going through the procedure. Next slide. So these are our screening instrument that we chose. We used the Rapid Adolescent Prevention Tool, which is a validated risk screening intervention system, and it's developed especially for the needs of students and professionals who work with them. And the neat thing about utilizing this automated tool is all the different tally interpretations that it gives you. And behind this were a lot of then, as you can see here, you could pop up and flag if a student were feeling down or lonely in a normal part of life, what is depression? And then you could bring up what is depression and speak to the student about that. Then we were able to just go down the list of here are some ways to help you begin to feel more like yourself. And A is to, certainly talk with a mental health care professional like myself or someone outside of school. We would talk about exercising regularly, journaling, talking with a trusted adult. It's amazing how many students, don't have a trusted adult in their life, and talk about how important that is. Any activities that they are involved in, what are they involved in? Are they in their bed all the time? Are they sleeping? Just a lot of the physical, mental, and spiritual questions that we as counselors often will ask to make sure students are doing some of the things to get them out of that depressive state. And then automatically, again, as part of the resource with the screening instrument was a host of resources at our fingertips that we could just hand or emailed direct to the student. The screening instrument is something that, again, we used a hybrid method. You can use just the craft, which is found online. When we get into the Q&A, I can talk a little further about that, but Massachusetts, as many of you know, has this program statewide. It was mandated legislatively, and so they utilize the craft tool, which again is evidence-based, strictly for substance abuse for teens aged 12 to 21. And that tool is used just simply 6 questions to ask kids. Again, ours was a little more comprehensive, and it included mental health questions as well as bullying questions. Next slide. So once a screen was done, the brief intervention portion of SBIRT is goal-oriented and asks a simple yes, no. Once the screening is completed, there are 2 scenarios for the brief intervention, and we call that react, or what we call a brief negotiated interview. So, for example, if a student who screened negative for substance use, they would receive positive reinforcement for making a healthy decision. And again, this is offered during a 1-to-1 conversation. And again, the goal being to support the continuation of a safe choice around health, safety, and success in school, and plan for any future challenges. And again, this 3-step model, known as REACT, reinforce, educate, and anticipate challenges of tomorrow. It's adapted from the SBIRT TTA. And then when a student answered yes to, or what we call a positive screen, is when we would get into more of a brief negotiated interview. And this is where a structured conversation explores behavior change in a respectful, non-judgmental manner. And it's, again, intentionally designed just to elicit reasons for change. And again, an example of that script is found in our guide under Appendix J, which is labeled Brief Negotiated Interview Worksheet. Referral to treatment, again, can mean simply counseling in school or an outside referral. An outside referral could, in many of my instances, was simply a referral to a local counselor that I may or may not have a relationship with. And or in the event, obviously, if there was any suicidal ideation and a risk assessment was done and they needed immediate treatment, obviously 911 was called or a parent was called, and we bring in Burlington County Crisis Intervention. Next slide. So resources that, again, this is part of our guide in the back of our resources, but these are materials that should be delivered to students, again, to reinforce those healthy decisions and to inform of any potential risk of using alcohol or other drugs. And so these is resources of many that are available. And we also have, as part of our guide, ways to look at all the different educational materials that you can hand to a student as you're communicating with them about their choices. Next slide. Here's some further samples of appendices in the implementation guide. There's a SBIRT planning checklist as an example, all the different steps to go through to bring a successful program to your school. This was an automated consent to disclose confidential information, and that's attached in Appendix G. And then SBIRT consent for parents, we sent this out in a Google form. And again, this is just 3 samples of many of the appendices that are attached to the publication. Laura, would you like to review our financing the school-based SBIRT?
Yeah, thanks, Mel. Thanks so much. Now that we have, seen what Bordentown and how Bordentown was able to implement its SBIRT program, and kind of been able to see how other schools who may not have the same staff as Bordentown could also, other avenues and alternate approaches, we're able to see that as well. So I know a lot of, one of the big questions that we get a lot is, how do we pay for it? So we wanted to just offer some pathways, some funding streams that the state could look into, and some schools. Opioid prevention funds, allocating cannabis tax revenues, appropriating the American Rescue Plan COVID funds to local education authorities, school-based SBIRT training and personnel costs could be done. Medicaid reimbursement. This is something that we are working with the SBIRT bill sponsors. I will talk about the SBIRT bill in just a few moments, but this is something that we're working with the sponsors on as a means to improve the current bill, and offer a way for schools to potentially get reimbursed under Medicaid if New Jersey were able to expand school-based Medicaid. And social emotional learning funding, municipal alliance program funding, American Rescue Plan ESSER funds could be used to establish a grant to local education agencies, and to support the hiring of staff, including counselors, to address students and educators' mental health and social emotional needs. So those are just a few opportunities that the state and some schools could look into to stand up a program in their districts, in their schools. So now that we've seen how to bring SBIRT to your schools, and we've heard, like I said, firsthand about Bordentown's case study in the implementation guide. So let's now bring on the rest of our Q&A panel. Barbara Kaufman, Director of Prevention Services at Prevention is Key, and Christina Puri, School Counselor at Lincoln Park School. Let's start with Barb. Barb, let's hear about the pilot programs that Prevention is Key has been working with. Oh, you're on mute.
Okay, got me? Got me? Can you hear? Okay, sorry. So excited I am to be here. Totally screwing up. But again, my name is Barb Kaufman from Prevention is Key. And first I want to thank New Jersey Citizen Action for group for all that you've done to promote SBIRT. Certainly since I've learned about it, and more so as we go. I've enjoyed so much working with you, Laura, and now Farial. Been wonderful. So let me tell you a little bit about what we do in Morris County. Little different from Nell's, and Nell, thank you for a great presentation. I was even jotting notes down from some of the stuff that you do, so thank you. I've been in the field of substance use disorder prevention for a long time, a little over 30 years. And so I've had a lot of time to think about making it better. What could we do to, especially with our youth, what could we do to get the kids before they start using alcohol or other drugs excessively? About 10 years ago, I mean, there, you know, we tried so many different things, and there are so many tools in the toolbox, and all important. But about 10 or so years ago, I learned about SBIRT, and I loved it immediately. I loved that it was easy and quick to administer, but most importantly, I loved that it gave us the opportunity to have conversations with our kids. To let them help us, and possibly even them, identify, you know, the warning signs of what was going on with them, any mental health issues or substance abuse issues. Finally, I thought it's a way to prevent or at least interrupt their use. So I did what I could. I started bringing awareness to the community. About, I guess about 10, 11 years ago, we brought a person from DMAS, Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, to Morris County to talk to full nurses first. We thought that was the first target. And then we brought in some SACs, and gotta say, the nurses and SACs were so excited about it, thought it would be tremendous. Getting to administration, though, was very difficult. So we couldn't get it going in any of the schools. Kept trying, and I kept writing grants. And finally, in October 2020, around the same time as yours now, PIC, was Prevention is Key, was awarded a grant to implement SBIRT in 10 pilot schools within the Morris County community. And then the year after, we got a smaller grant to implement SBIRT to Passaic County schools. That was through a Passaic County grant. So we're so lucky for that. Since then, we've implemented SBIRT in 14 Morris County schools. 4, I think so far in Passaic, but we have, we're hoping by year end to have at least 4 more in Morris and a couple more in Passaic. I can answer a lot of questions about how we have helped the schools. I hope, right, Chris? I hope it helped the schools. What we do in our agency is to, we provide a little bit of a stipend to the school to help them with some of the expenses. They're able to use it any way they want to. We have a dedicated staff that is there always for technical assistance. We offer trainings in SBIRT, and we will, this week, actually tomorrow, we're offering another training in motivational interviewing, which is a big part of the brief intervention. We provide a protocol manual. We provide Excel spreadsheets for data. All we ask of the schools is to, and correct me, Chris, if I'm wrong, but all we ask of the schools is to provide us with the numbers of kids that they have screened, how many go on from the screening to brief intervention to referral to treatment. We, though, in our office, we contract with Epiphany Community Services, which is an evaluator. So they do all the evaluations. trying to think, we offer them, we give to each school a resource manual of if they should go on to referral to treatment. At their hands, they know all of the adolescent treatment centers, inpatient, outpatient, private, and all that stuff in Morris County and the surrounding areas. So right now, though, I mean, I will answer anything that you need. I think Nell did it so beautifully, but I'm going to now ask Chris, and I thank her so much for coming. Chris is, again, a student assistant counselor in Lincoln Park School District, and one of the first Morris County schools to implement SBIRT through our program. And she's got hands-on experience for a couple of years. She's successfully implemented SBIRT. This is your second year, right, Chris? So
I think our third, maybe.
Third, whoa.
Yeah,
Wow.
it might be our
Time
third.
flies.
Yeah, time flies.
Yeah.
Yep. So, Lincoln Park Middle School is a smaller school in Morris County. We have about 400 students, grades 5 through 8, and I am the only school counselor at the school. We do have support staff from CST, and just last year we partnered with Sage Thrive to have a counselor at our school to help with some of our students whose parents have gave consent for her to provide treatment. She runs groups, and then she's also there as emergency staff for risk assessments or for students with behavioral difficulties who find themselves not able to be in class. I know a lot of us are in education on this call, probably everyone. And last year was, I think, far tougher than any of us expected it to be. I remember coming out of the 2021 school year, I guess, and thinking, all right, it's going to be, we're back in, it's a hybrid schedule, but we're back in and things are going to be better. And it was very tough with mental health. It was very tough. That being said, I did find the time to screen 50 students last year. We used the craft plus N at the middle school. So it's the craft with the nicotine component. When I think, especially in a middle school population, when you're talking to parents about a screening tool, one thing that they are very concerned about is vaping and nicotine use. It's hard to, it's hard for a parent to imagine that their middle schooler would be dabbling in opioids or in, smoking marijuana or cocaine or even, drinking alcohol, even though we know some are. It is hard for them to listen to that and to process that, but smoking or vaping, they know, they know that some of their kids are doing it, some of their peers are doing it. This screening tool has allowed me the platform to reach many of our kids that I may not normally talk to because they aren't presenting with issues. Their grades are fine. I know they're not kids that I'm talking to about their academics. They're not getting into trouble. They're not missing a lot of school. They're not having peer issues that they're coming in to talk about. But through these screenings, I have, been able to support students who were struggling just like behind. They were struggling to themselves, I guess. And that's one thing that I really appreciate from the program is that it is catching kids and interrupting that process before it becomes a huge problem, before it becomes problematic. I know last year there was a couple of students that came in for risk assessments who had suicide ideation that were not on my radar at all. These are kids that, had you told me the day before that I would be sending them out for clearance, I would have been shocked. So a program like this, whether you're using mental health, if you're using a craft tool, you can start this dialogue before they're in your office, because they're going to be in your office one way or another, before they're coming in crisis. And then that is freeing up your resources and the county's resources because you're able to catch it earlier. And it's a problem that can be solved maybe through motivational interviewing or brief intervention. And it doesn't have to go all the way to treatment. These students that we were sending out for suicide ideation last year, it was turning into hospitalizations, it was turning into IOP. And so had these kids come in caught earlier, it may not have gone that way. I did see a couple of people asking where you're referring out to treatment. McPick has sent us a list of resources. Also, as a school counselor, I have a list of places in the area. Our district has a list of resources. I know one that I refer to for students with a wide array of difficulties. I'll refer to Perform Care, just forgot the name. Perform Care, Mobile Crisis, FISH. These are all programs that we do work with anyway. And like I said, we're very, very fortunate that our district partners with Sage Thrive and that we have an LAC in the building to provide help. So those are really, really important relationships, trying to establish relationships with MSWs and LPCs in your area that maybe, you know, can work with families' insurances, or if your district is fortunate enough, can they partner with the facility? I know ours is very small, so we don't contract with a facility, but a larger district might be able to do that.
Thanks, Christina. You know, the successes of your program only further supports the effectiveness of SBIRT as a tool, and the applicability of it, you know, not only for high schools, but middle schools, as you shared. You know, I think we have a nice collection of questions in our Q&A. So I will ask for y'all, what is our first question for our panel?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Yes, there are actually a lot of questions. Some of the questions were based after, you know, as the slides were going on. So I'm going to refer to when the slides were mentioned. For example, Laura, when you were presenting SBIRT, there came a question. You know, the screening part of SBIRT can be by a trained person, not necessarily a licensed person. And then presumably a different person who would do a brief intervention. And then perhaps a third person, a school counselor, could do the referral to treatment. The question is, how does this jibe with the proposed bill language, which seems to require people with specific titles, categories to do screening that the same person then can conduct for the rest of BIRT, B-I-R-T of SBIRT?
Yeah, so it is correct. You only need to be trained in SBIRT to administer it. So that allows for a wider array of programs to be set up. You don't have to have a SAC counselor, you know, in your school to be able to administer SBIRT. SBIRT is about having the conversation and trying to, I should say, universal SBIRT is about having the conversation with all of your students, and so that no student is missed. That's the whole point of universal SBIRT, trying to match those students and provide them with the necessary support and resources that they need. We're currently working with the bill sponsors on some improvements to the bill. So it will, should it get called up to committee and submitted amendments go through, it will include the fact that trained school personnel are one of the many listed people who can administer SBIRT.
Okay, I have another question. This is probably for Nell. When you were talking about consent, the question came in, how does this dovetail with minor consent to mental health treatment? Nell?
Yes, I'm here. Mine with a consent form was sent home to parents. And then of the 203 that in the freshman class, just 100 were able to participate in SBIRT. And at any time, parents can opt out. And then, you know, for me, when having the conversation, like Chris was saying, with the student, most of our conversation is held confidential. And, you know, 42 CFR allows us to keep the conversation between the two of us as a trusted counselor to student. Chris, do you want to add to that?
No, same thing. I mean, it's a similar confidentiality that you would have with any student coming in to talk about mental health concerns. You know, you break that confidentiality when they're in danger or someone else is. And I saw in the chat, there was a question about, do you disclose to parents what a substance a student is using? I think that comes into if they're referred to treatment. You know, if you are doing the brief intervention or you're doing motivational interviewing, then it follows those same counseling confidentiality laws and protocols that unless there's this clear and present danger, that confidentiality is maintained. And again, I know that Nell mentioned this, but when you're interviewing the student, every single time I tell them this, what we talk about is confidential unless you're in danger or someone else is in danger.
Thank you. Another question for Christina and Nell. How do you select which screener and specific screening questions to use?
That depends on the school and the team. Like Chris is in a middle school, so her questions were, I think, more based on nicotine and vaping. We chose in a high school setting, alcohol, substance use, and mental health questions. But that depends on your population and what you choose. So there are various tools and screenings that you can choose from.
Okay. Another question is, and I guess anyone can answer this one, is were the students referred offsite for intervention? A follow-up question to that is, was insurance billed for any of the services? If so, was there funding? If so, was there funding to provide services to those without insurance?
So again, referral to treatment when it comes to the SBIRT is it could be an in-school referral, it can be an out-of-school referral, or in my case with a couple of my students, one particular student did have insurance and they were given outside counseling. Another was referred to, as Chris had, Perform Care, which is funded by the state. And then one other student I know, she did have insurance and she was able to get into an intensive outpatient treatment program.
Right. So I would assume, Fariel, that is up to the individual, you know, what that child needs. And again, when we had sent the resource manuals, we included in there whether or not insurance was accepted, what insurance is, whether or not Medicaid was accepted or not, self-pay, you know, all of them. But it's individual, I would imagine. Right, Chris? Is that how you do it too? Right?
It's usually individual. Like I said, again, we're very lucky to be contracting with Sage Thrive, and I don't know how long that's going to last because I know it is very pricey. But we do have the LAC through that, but not all parents grant consent for their kids to see her, even though this is free counseling. It's free counseling. It is in the school. It's school based. You still, you know, you do have families that are resistant to it. I again, though, have to point out that this really is no different than a student coming in and expressing suicide ideation. You know, this is, as the district, of course, you pay for clearance, but if there's counseling past that, that's recommended, it's also up to the family to engage in that treatment or not. It's not like we're saying, all right, you have to show us proof that your child is receiving some kind of follow-up treatment for them to enter school. We're not saying that. We're saying this is what we're recommending as a mental health professional based on the screening tools. But again, it's up to the individual family to agree to that.
Okay, I'm going to be mindful that we are actually coming up to time. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So I will take a couple of more questions. And after that, if there are more coming in, we will reach out to the panelists to have them answered, and then we will get back to you post webinar. So a couple of questions that I think we should definitely answer is one, how does the guide and the tools developed incorporate the needs of students with various disabilities?
I know for me, when I'm doing the craft, I may reword a question, and the craft is very straightforward. It's like, have you not, or how many days? So I may word differently what I'm talking about. One of the questions is, have you ever ridden in the car driven by someone, including yourself, who has been drinking or using drugs and is intoxicated? So before I ask that question, actually, of all my students, I will ask, so what does it mean to be intoxicated, or if someone is drunk or high? What might that look like? What might that smell like? And so we talk about that first, and then I ask that final question. So it's knowing who you're interviewing and what their level is, and adjusting your questions kind of on the fly.
Okay, another question. I think this would be good for Barb. How do you address hesitation by schools to implement SBIRT?
We do all that we can. We again provide a lot of assistance. We talk with them, things like this, or things like what we had done last year, or many of the trainings that we do. Make people aware of the benefits of SBIRT. We have offered many. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Heather Ogden, but she's incredible, and she does our SBIRT trainings for us, and has done numerous webinars on the benefits for schools, for students, for parents. That's really all we can do. We can just keep talking to them about what it does. I love, especially, and Chris, you brought this up, that it is, or possibly with Laura, a universal screening. So those kids that might never have been spoken with before are able to get it out now. I love that. We had some schools that had thought that the most important thing was the relationship of the kids with the person implementing SBIRT. Some used coaches, health teachers, and did them, within the class, randomly, of course. But I just love that idea, and that's what I stress too. The kids that we are missing, as Chris said, just letting go. One of my favorite things that I read about it was that we can finally interrupt use or talk to them in the brief intervention. I love part of the motivational stuff, and I'm sure Chris, now you've used it, was stuff like, so what's so good about drinking or using this drug or whatever? And the kid will say it and then say, well, what are the bad things? And tell me some of the bad things. And has that boy or girl think for himself or herself about use and what it is doing for them or not doing for them. So I love it. I love it with all kids. I wish more kids could be involved with it, especially that brief intervention. I love it. I think everybody should go on to it, but that's my thing.
Thank you so much. Again, as I said, I would like to be mindful of time. So there are a lot more questions, unfortunately, that we cannot answer right now, but we will definitely take the advice and expertise of our panelists and get back to you post-webinar. So thank you very much for answering all the questions. Laura?
Thanks, Brielle. and to our panelists for this very informative discussion. You know, before we close, we would like to share a few announcements with you, and Adam's going to help me with that. So as Adam puts up that slide, you know, last year, Governor Murphy signed the school-based depression screening program grant into law. The program provides funding and resources to help school districts identify the symptoms of depression and facilitate access to appropriate treatment for students grades 7 through 12. Just as a not so subtle hint, this is an excellent opportunity for schools who participate in this program to use SBIRT. And many of you, since it has been signed, since the law has been signed, the grant program, many of you have been asking how your school can apply for the grants. So we reached out to the Department of Education for an update, and they asked that we share with all of you that they are currently developing the program and the guidance, and they will release additional information during this school year, during the 2022-2023 school year. And once finalized, the information will be distributed to all school districts through a memo to the superintendents. And it will also be posted on the Department of Education's website. So in the meantime, they're asking for all of you to look out for that information and to visit the Department of Education's website mental health page. So just an update on that program. And lastly, we hope that you will all join us in support for bringing school-based SBIRT to all New Jersey high schools with Bill S298A2504, and call on our legislators to post and pass this much needed support for our students. We cannot afford to do nothing. We need to, you know, as we mentioned in the beginning of this, the numbers are not going down, they're going up. And having a broad statewide approach to addressing this mental health and substance misuse challenge issues among our students is paramount to their success. So status quo, not doing anything, is just not an option as far as we're concerned. So we're hoping that you will join us to support this. We will be including a fact sheet of the bill in your post webinar email that you will receive tomorrow. And of course, as we mentioned, we do know that all New Jersey schools and districts are not equally resourced. Only 1 in 3 of our schools have a mental health counselor, yet all schools are required to train personnel to identify, prevent, and intervene on behalf of students struggling with mental health and substance misuse. So it's up to us to give schools the tools to fulfill this mandate. SBIRT addresses this disparity because it's created to be administered, as we mentioned, by trained personnel, not only licensed. So this allows schools, whether you are under-resourced or not, to be able to implement a screening program. Because as I mentioned, we can't hold off any longer, you know, having this conversation with our students and giving them the supports that they need. We need to start asking the questions, and SBIRT is, as you can see from our panelists, that's the evidence. It's an evidence-based process and tool in which to do it. So as a thank you to all of our registrants and attendees, we will be sending each of you a copy of the SBIRT in Schools implementation guide so that you can begin to address our students' mental health and substance misuse challenges comprehensively, broadly, and preventatively. On behalf of our panelists and all of us at New Jersey Citizen Action, thank you for joining us today and have a great night.